Oh, hi everyone again. So this is part two of the harmonization videos. So this is really thinking about like higher grades and things like that. So it says here, try to use some seventh chords. So we kind of looked at seventh chords, looking at how you can build them with an extra note. Essentially, it's another third onto the chord, and sort of using them in chord progressions normally anyway. But there's some other things on here like suspensions, inversions, and secondary dominance, essentially. So what I'd suggest is whenever you're going to use anything quite advanced like that, to begin with, it's much better off to start with start basic. I always think of music theory like kind of building a house, really, in that you kind of work up from foundations. So we did this in the last video, created this piece of music, and it works very, very functionally. We kind of looked at every note in the melody pretty much and built chords that work on those specific melody notes. And you probably saw how we didn't listen to it once until the end when we'd done everything, and it sounded pretty good. One thing you might notice is I noticed on the F major 7 chords I actually had an F there, which is fine, but it was just an F major chord then. So I've lowered those down on that one, so we F major 7, but that one actually, I decided I actually just like the F basic F chord sound better. So if we have a look at sticking some of these things in, so this is what I suggest, is just do it normally as we did in the last video, and then come on to adding this stuff in, essentially. So suspensions. So suspensions are where if we take a chord such as, if I use this to write on, I don't know, like a chord that has like a root, a third, and a fifth. Let's put that further on. So if it was a C major chord, it would have a C, an E, and a G. So we looked at in one of our lessons where suspensions actually come from in terms of the classical point of view of them having preparations and the suspension and the resolution. But as pop rock musicians, we often don't use these. A really good person to go listen to for like suspended fourth chords is Keith Emerson. So he uses them like all the time. I sent out a video recently with Jordan Rudess demonstrating some different approaches he uses from Genesis, stuff like that. Keith Emerson, he demonstrates how he just uses arpeggios, moving them around using suspended fourth chords, and it sounds great. Anyway, how you build these. So we have C, E, G. So this is our normal C major chord. What we need to do basically is take this third note and raise it up to be a perfect fourth from the root, which is usually in most scales is going to be the fourth degree. If it's the Lydian mode, though, it wouldn't, but most scales it's just the fourth degree of the scale. So if we look at our scale up here, we've got C, D, E, and then F. Yeah, or you could work out hopefully that a fourth above C is an F. So instead of an E, we're going to have an F, essentially in this chord, and then that's not a third anymore, it's a fourth. So if you're thinking more about a pattern to work out a suspended fourth chord is root, fourth, and fifth. And then what usually happens is in the piece of music, this fourth would then resolve because this creates tension because the distance between an F and a G is a major second, and from oral you'll know that major second intervals are dissonant, so it creates tension essentially that wants to be released. And the release is to drop it back down to a third, and then it sounds great, essentially. So that's what these chords are. If we did it off of another chord, let's say, for instance, a D major chord. So D major chord usually has F sharp and an A, essentially. There we go, let's separate that a bit. So a perfect fourth up from a D is a G. If it's a major chord, you can just move this up a semitone is a way to think about it. So if I had a fourth, instead of a sharp, it's a G. So that would be a G, D, G, and A would be a D sus4 chord. So let's look over here at our piece of music. Sus chords can work on minor chords, but they tend to sound really strong on major chords. Now what we need to make sure basically is that the melody note isn't doing the third, because else it's going to clash. We play the fourth when the melody note is playing the third. It's going to be a semitone away from each other. It's going to clash and sound horrible. So for instance, this chord, I was thinking immediately like the penultimate chord is often a great place to do this, but that's going to sound pretty bad because if we put in a fourth from a G, it's a C note, and we have a B in the melody, and we don't want to change our melody. So it's going to clash and sound horrible. So we won't do it there. Where we could do it, let's just have a look, like these F chords. Could we do it here? We could, but this would be going outside the key because a fourth away from an F is a B flat, which is out of the key. But if you wanted to sound uber cool, you could try that. And it would be a way of getting outside the key a little bit. But it would sound quite modern and different at that point in time. But we could do it on these C major chords. So for instance, this last one back here, what I'm going to do is change that to sus4. And let's stick another one in. Just get a bit cramped over here. We'll separate this out and move it around. Because that little symbol is actually kind of, it doesn't print. So it's not overlapped because you want to see it. Anyway, so let's change the rhythm of this to crotchets. And I'm going to stick the same chord in again and work it out over here. So, like we just did from a C root, right? So it's got a C root, fifth then would be a G, and then if we count up, so C, D, E, F is the fourth. So that is a C sus4 chord, because remember C, E, G is a C major chord, push the third up to a fourth. So I just need to find it. So in this chord, I'll find the third, and look, I'm going to need to make the third an F. And then what the F is going to do, so this is, at this point here, I'm going to pull this up. So this was a seventh, which I don't really want in this. It's going to make it, it's got enough going on as it is. So let's do the same here. So you can see that this chord here, the C chord, is C, E, G. This one's C, F, G. Yeah? So it's got that second sort of distance. It's going to clash. And that should be that. So if we would play this. There we go. And we could look at sticking one somewhere else, maybe on the minor chord. So if we did like A minor, so an A minor is usually a third, is usually the C and E. But in this instance, we want the fourth, which is a D. So move that up to a D. And we could try it on this. So I'm looking for the C, and I'm going to push it to a D, essentially. And I need to change the rhythm of it. So I'm going to rewrite exactly the same chord. So this is an A minor. It's an A minor 7, and sus4s actually sound pretty good with A minor 7s, used in Wonderwall by Oasis. Very nice. So this is the third here, the C. So on this one, I'm going to push it up to a D. And this is like an A, because technically it's not really minor now, because it doesn't have a third. So we call it A sus sort of 7 or something like that would do. And then this one, oh, this sort of thing, A minor 7. So when it resolves. So that's suspensions. Really cool sound is to actually use sus2s. So an A chord, that would be a B. So a second from the root. So A, B is the second. And again, it creates tension. These chords sound really, really nice and modern though. I regularly use these when I'm playing a song with a band. Instead of playing like C major, A minor, F major, I might play C sus2, probably A minor 7, and then F sus2. And it sounds way, way better. Much more modern, contemporary sounding. So C chord would be C, D, and G. Yeah, so it's like root, fifth, and instead of the third, it's D. In terms of the classical thing, if we look at this chord over here, this chord is actually prepared properly, because this suspended note here, the F in it, essentially, so if we go back to sus 4s, right, so it's an F. This F here, if you're interested, the proper way to prepare a classical sort of type of suspension is that should be in the previous chord, which it is. Look, it's there. So it's almost like a real suspension is sort of hung over. So you could add a tie onto it to tie it in to it. So you just hold that note and then you play these notes. It creates the suspension and then you resolve it there if you wanted to. Anyway, should we see what else we're going to do? So that's suspensions. Inversions. Now, inversions are one of your best tools as a musician to create some really interesting music. So inversions are basically where the chord, the root note of the chord is, or the bass note, the note in the lowest register, is not the root note of the chord. So for instance, if we take a C major chord, root third, fifth, C, E, G, basically, if there's a C at the bottom of it, it's root position. If there's an E at the bottom of the chord, it's in first inversion. If it's G in the bottom, it's in second inversion. Now the inversion, like words like that, are quite classical terms. We tend to see them as slash chords. So a C chord in root position is written like that. A C chord in first inversion is a C over E. A C chord over a G, so second inversion, would be written like that. So the chords on the left and sort of looks like it's on top of the slash. Is the chord, and the thing on the right and underneath the slash is the root note. That's how we tend to see them as slash chords, but that's first inversion, second inversion. So again, the same thing. Inversions can be good to think of first because it creates really good bass line. So I might be thinking of actually creating a scalic bass line, and then my chord choices work from there. But another good thing is to actually just look for opportunities when you've scored something out like this and think, well, where could we do it, essentially, that would sound good? So, if we have a look around, I mean, a really typical one is on this chord 5 to chord 1, is to put it in first inversion. So I'll bring, instead of the G, so we think about this, right? So the G chord is G, B, and D. Instead of the root being a G, I'm going to make it a B. And then what you'll see what happens is if it's chord 5 to chord 1, so take the G, put it up to a B, the third, what happens now is that you get this really nice semitone movement up to the root of chord 1. If you're a classical type of thinker, though, you'll see parallel octaves. Do you see the melody goes B, C, and now this goes B, C? So if you were doing like a classical exam paper for A level, you wouldn't do that because you get told off. But with pop rock musicians, we do what we like. So you could try that if you wanted to. Let's see if we can find another opportunity where we can do something like this. So these chords aren't that good for that. Let's have a look. Here we go. So, I mean, what we could do is this F chord, instead of having F as the root, so if we look at an F chord, up here we've got our F chord, we could do A or C, essentially in the bass. So I'll try moving that up to A, and then we can actually keep the A bass note going. And it's quite nice when you have a bass note like keep going and you change chords over the top of it. Or we could go to a C there essentially and do it in second inversion. So what I'd write is it's F major 7 slash C at that point. Yeah? So if I play it now. And we could actually do this whole thing over C. So I could get rid of this suspension idea. Like that. And just make this A minus 7 over C. So this is actually called a pedal tone when I've got like a load of chords changing over a C bass. So it's C bass, C bass, C bass, and then it changes here. So and with inversions, it is quite good to start with them to begin with. So for instance, this chord here looks like a G, so I could go and stick a G in like that. And then this looks like a C chord, essentially. So what we could try and do is go for a C, and then this looks like it could be a few chords, but it could be a G chord, and go like that, and then this could be an A minor chord. So then I've got, if I'm thinking about the bass line to create inversions, like a G chord, a C chord, so they're just root position, but then I would have a G over a B, so first inversion, and then an A minor chord, and this inversion chord here allows me to create a nice scalic bass line. So that's why we use inversions a lot of the time, to create pedal tones where you keep the bass note the same, or to create like a scalic bass. So you can see in this example, I did it here to create this kind of up, down, and back up sort of thing going on there. So the other thing that you need is secondary dominance. So secondary dominant is, there is one, did I put one in this? No, I didn't. But we could add one, essentially. So secondary dominant is, if we go over here, essentially, where we precede a chord with its dominant chord, essentially, and this is where, just search for the cycle of this. Alright, let's find a nice picture of the cycle of this. That's a good one. So the cycle of this tends to go anti-clockwise, kind of confusing. But if, let's try and stick one in. So I know when we wrote this that the ending here uses the cycle of fifths. Yeah. So if we look on here, it goes not from F but from D minor. So it goes D, then it goes to G. So we go around to G, and then C. So it goes around there. So 1, 2, 3. So it goes round the cycle of fifths. So if you're targeting a C chord, because it's a piece of music in the key of C, and you play its dominant is the one kind of back round the cycle over here. So chord 5 to chord 1, G to C is 5, 1. Now what we can do is we can do like a momentary modulation to another key. So this G chord here, right, that one, is preceded by a D chord, that one. So a secondary dominant is where basically, instead of it being in the key, so D minor 7 is in the key of C. Do you see there's no accidentals, no sharp effects? What I can do is, actually, instead of making it a minor 7, I'm going to make it a dominant chord, which is where the term secondary dominant comes from, with dominant chord. So to make something a dominant chord, if I go back here, these secondary dominants should tumble around the cycle of fifths, yeah? So if I find my D minor 7, okay, all you need to do to turn a minor 7 into a dominant 7 chord is find the third, that one, and raise it. So F becomes F sharp. That is now D7, yeah? It's not minor because I raised the third and it's got minor 7, so it's a dominant types, yeah? So I'm just going to get rid of that so we don't mess around with it too much. And if we go back to here, if you remember I just raised the F to an F sharp, it works because there's no F in the melody. Yeah, if there's an F in the melody, this wouldn't really work. But I find an F in the chord, and let's raise it to F sharp. Check there's no other Fs in it. That is now not D minor, but D7, D dominant 7, and it's tumbling around the cycle of fifths, D to G. So it's going to work because it's dominant chord going. So what's actually happening here, when you hit the D7, it's chord 5 of the key of G. That's what you're in here. You're in the key of G, and this is chord 5 going to chord 1 of the key of G. It's only that when you actually hit the G, 5 to 1, it's not actually chord 1. It's actually chord 5 going to chord 1 in C. And that's what secondary dominants are. And jazz uses this all the time. It's always using secondary dominants all over the place, essentially. So that is now a secondary dominant tumbling around to the dominant chord, which tumbles around there when we made it into a suspension. So there's lots going on here. So if we play it now, and it's starting with this kind of pedal inversion idea. There we go. So that's it. So do you see how we have been using 7 chords anyway? We put a suspension, like a suspended 4 in. We used inversions to create actually a pedal tone, but we can use it most of the time to create scalic bass lines. And we stuck some secondary dominants in, essentially. And that's it. The last thing that is really good to think about is contrary motion with the melody. So that's where should we go? So what I might do is think about the fact that this melody in this bar, do you see the melody is descending, it's coming down, so I want the bass line to ascend to create contrary motion. So contrary motion is where if the melody comes down, the bass goes up. If the melody goes up like here, then the bass should go down, essentially. Would sound really good. So in this bar, it's coming down. So this is just general, it doesn't have to be like massively precise, but generally I want this bar to go up. So I could go and put an F down there. And what would sound really good, this is really clever, is I'm going to do an inversion on this chord. It's going to sound really cool. So slash F sharp. Yeah, so the third, this is now in first inversion, the third is in the bass. And look what I'm doing to the bass. So I'm going to get it to go F, F sharp to G. So it's coming up chromatically. F, F sharp, G. Super cool. Yeah, so really, really cool. Anyway, that's enough of that. Good luck, and I hope to speak to you again soon.